cheating wife and my new hobby. I don't know if it's myth or science, but in a Sociology 101 course in college, I, Derek Dawson, studied the unusual frequency of albinism in the Hopi Indians. According to myth science, there was an unusually high incidence of albinism in the Hopi culture in the 1800s. It turned out that albino men were treated differently. They didn't need to go out hunting or in the fields, but rather stay with the women in the village during the day. This gave them a reproductive sexual advantage over other men in the tribe. I remember thinking, lucky albinos, and wondering if, despite my normal skin color, I could one day have the same advantages as an albino male in the Hopi tribe. Although I majored in Sociology 101, my major was computer science. After graduation, I co-founded a technology company with two of my friends, which we sold to Google just 4 years later for almost $1 billion. At the ripe old age of 26, my fortune was about $100 million. I guess having $100,000 would change a lot of people, but it didn't change me much. I grew up middle class and had no desire for a mansion, yacht, or Lamborghini. True, I bought myself a few nice things, started a charity, and bought my parents a new house. But other than that, I didn't change my lifestyle too much. Although I handed over the day-to-day running of the charity to a professional, I took care of its IT support and interacted with our clients, mostly underprivileged children, whenever possible, because I love children. I met my wife, Grace, who is 2 years older than me, when I was 27 and fell in love with her immediately. She too came from a middle-class background, but unlike me, was strongly motivated by material things. It wasn't until we had been married for a year that I realized how driven she was, but by then we had our first child, our daughter Zoe. I guess I should have known Grace was overly materialistic when she asked to draw up a prenup before we were married. Since she was 2 years older and worked at a prestigious advertising agency, she thought she had acquired more wealth than I had. Just for budgeting purposes, I was taking $4,000 a month of my own money, since I was funding the entire $2.5 million a year operation, from a charitable fund I had set up for my IT services. Apparently, Grace assumed that this was the only money I had, not counting the bank account, which only had about $15,000 in it. I never told her about my multi-million-dollar brokerage accounts, primarily because I wanted her to marry me for love, not money, and after she asked for a prenup, I saw no reason to tell her about it. I think she was surprised that I was quick to agree to a prenup. Of course, since I had many times more wealth than she did, as long as the prenup was mutual, it was to my advantage. After Zoe was born, Grace wanted to get back to work as soon as possible. I told her I wanted to be a stay-at-home dad and work part-time for a charitable organization. So that she wouldn't freak out, I told her that rich uncle had died and left us enough money to buy a decent house and for me to make up for lost wages for at least 6 years. Zoe was the light of my life. Since Grace went back to work, she unfortunately had to switch to bottle feeding instead of eating her mother's breast. But I bought her the best formula on the market, and she developed just fine. Before buying a house, I did extensive research. I wanted a suburb with lots of trees and open space, good neighbors, and other families with children. I even lived in a few different houses for a week before deciding. This was only possible because at the time the real estate market was on the decline and many houses were for sale. I settled on a house on Lilac Court, a cul-de-sac with 5 very nice houses, but no mock houses. 3 of the houses were occupied by young families and one by a retired couple who were very friendly and nice. The 3 houses were occupied by young families: Brittany, 29, with her 1-year-old daughter Sarah, Chloe, 32, with her 3-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son, and Melanie, 30, with her 1-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter and their husbands. I don't know if it's Freudian or not, but the 3 young women, mothers from my chosen neighborhood, were very good-looking. Their height ranged from 5 feet 6 to 5 feet 9 inches. All 3 had slender bodies. All 3 were already, despite having lived at Lilac Court for only a year to 3 years, best buddies, sharing childcare responsibilities. With all three young moms, I immediately developed a comfortable relationship. Their husbands, like Grace, worked and traveled a lot, so we spent a lot of time together. I developed relationships with them individually and together. Since I had a lot of money, and since all three young families had bought homes at the limit of their financial means, I paid for all of our outings and excursions that they allowed me. If I bought tickets, I told them that the tickets cost 1/3 of their actual price and never showed them the tickets with the prices on them. I also bought everyone gifts that happened to catch my eye. The gifts were all high quality, but not ostentatious, so unless they looked them up online, they didn't know their true cost. About a year after we moved to Lilac Court, I wanted a second child badly enough to start lobbying Grace, but she showed no interest. The reason was twofold. She didn't want to go through pregnancy again, and she didn't want to take time off work. Eventually, I talked her into surrogacy, which she wasn't thrilled about until I told her, "Kim Kardashian did it. Why can't you?" Her attitude changed after that, and as long as I did all the organizing and let her believe it was only worth 1/10 of what it really was, she was fine with it. Since Grace was under light sedation and the egg collection procedure only took 30 minutes, it didn't disrupt her work schedule. She underwent the procedure on Saturday and was back to work on Monday. The surrogate was a 20-year-old girl named Libby who lived with her parents and was in dire need of money for tuition. She was smart, healthy both physically and mentally, and her humble parents not only didn't mind, but supported her, because nowhere else could she get the $80,000 I was paying her in stages. I had my attorney prepare an ironclad contract that covered all aspects of surrogacy laws in our state, and I had a genuine interest in Libby and her family. I didn't treat Libby as a piece of meat or an employee. I treated her as a valued friend. I met with her at least once a week, made sure she received the best medical care, took her out to lunch or dinner often when Grace was away, instilled in her the importance of good nutrition, and paid for her to go to a fitness club that had a great program for pregnant women. I also promised her that if she graduated from community college and went to a state university, I would pay for her tuition and living expenses at the university. During Libby's pregnancy with her second child, which eventually turned out to be Billy, one unpleasant incident occurred. Due to Grace's carelessness, I found some documents that made me suspect her of having an affair. Given my unlimited resources, I hired a private detective with offices in many cities to check everything out. 2 months later, I had their report. Grace was having sex with a couple of her bosses, but only when she was out of town, at least during those 2 months. Apparently, this was part of her plan to move up the corporate ladder quickly and make a lot of money. This knowledge changed my perspective on many things. When baby Billy was born, I was over the moon, because I had always wanted to have at least 2 children, and as a stay-at-home parent, I was able to watch and participate in all of their events. I was an unattached photographer and took all sorts of pictures and videos of them, often interacting with neighborhood kids and moms. When Libby was pregnant with Billy, my interactions with the young moms from Lilac Street became more interesting. Each of them individually told me about the problems the other two were having in their marriages, including a lack of love interest from their husbands and that their husbands were likely cheating. At first, I didn't think it was serious. However, after learning about Grace's extracurricular activities, I took a different view. I concluded that my roommates coordinated their revelations about others' lack of loving fulfillment and their husbands likely cheating in an attempt to encourage me. I started looking for signs that they were interested, and while I'm not the most observant guy, the signs were certainly there. I decided to see what would happen and stepped up the gift-giving to each of Brittany, Chloe, and Melanie. Brittany was the most provocative mother on the cul-de-sac and had a truly beautiful face. I had slightly more feelings for her than the other two, although I liked all of them very much and found them all attractive. Brittany also seemed to be the most grateful mother when I gave her a sundress, a tracksuit, a tennis bracelet, a pashmina, an original painting, and other little things at various times. One late morning, Brittany was at my house drinking coffee while our 3-year-olds were playing in my rubber room, and I had just finished regurgitating my baby Billy before he was about to go to bed. Brittany was wearing the sundress I had given her, but I wasn't sure if she was wearing underwear. The top of the dress wasn't see-through enough to determine if her breasts were covered, and I didn't get a good enough look at her tanned, sculpted thighs to know if there was a wedge of fabric between them. "I have a question for you, Derek," she said with a smile. "That doesn't sound good, Brittany. Let me put Billy down and do a quick check on the kids before you ask it," I replied. I put Billy in his crib and he fell asleep as soon as he landed. Sarah and Zoe, my best friends, were happily playing in the rubber room in some made-up game that only they knew the rules to, so I just stuck my head in there, smiled, and closed the door to the rubber room and quietly walked back into the kitchen. "The girls are great and Billy's already asleep," I announced as I walked back into the kitchen. "So what's your provocative question, Britt?" "What makes you think it's a provocative question?" She smiled. "Everything you do is provocative," I hummed. She took a sip of her coffee and then said with a smirk, "Chloe, Melanie, and I were comparing notes. You gave each of us many wonderful gifts, including this sundress." The words, "including this sundress," came out as she lifted it higher than it should have been, and I wondered if there was a kitten or a rabbit sitting on her lap under the dress, or if she wasn't wearing panties. "And yet you've never asked for anything in return. Why?" Now it was my turn to smile. "Seeing you happy and friendly," I began my answer, putting emphasis on the word friendly. "Gives me bliss," I continued. Brittany's smile grew even wider. "You know what I think? I think you're just trying to get me into bed." I stood up, took her by the shoulders, and lifted her out of the chair. She had a look on her face, midway between pleased and defiant, as I looked into her dancing green eyes. "You're not wearing anything, are you, Britt?" I repeated, this time as a rhetorical question. It was clear she wasn't going to answer, so I kissed her forcefully. She kissed back. I broke our kiss, looked at her again, and kissed her again. After that, I started caressing Brittany's body, and then I had sex with her. After that, I stood up, pulling her collapsed body to me. "You're a sorceress," I whispered in her ear. She turned to look at me, and I kissed her hard. When we broke the kiss, she said, "Do you always take only what you want, you wild beast?" "I didn't notice you trying to talk me out of it, and I never once heard the word enough," I growled. "Just because it was probably my best sex ever doesn't mean I wanted you to do it. You just outplayed me," she grinned. I kissed her again, then took her by the shoulders and pulled her face away from mine. "I want more of your cozy body, so you better avoid me in the future. If you don't, you'll be getting sex every chance you get," I growled. "I'll talk to Chloe and Melanie and we'll figure out a way to get back at you for using me, you insolent brute," she replied. "You do that," I grinned, kissing her again. I would have embarked on another round of sex, but then I heard Zoe chirping in the hallway, her distinctive girlish voice, "Daddy, come see what we've done." This brought us both out of the state we were in. "We'll be right there. Wait, Zoe dear, we're coming," I shouted back in the nicest voice I was capable of. "You're already here, aren't you?" Britt said with a smile, pushing herself off me and trying to straighten her dress and wipe the sweat from her forehead. Britt and I stared at each other. With my handkerchief, I wiped the residual sweat from her face, and with my thumb, she wiped the lipstick off my lips. On shaky legs, we walked to the rubber room and oohed and ahed over the creations the girls had made. After a couple minutes, Britt playfully slapped my arm and then headed to the bathroom while I continued to chat with the girls. Then we made the girls lunch and ate with them. When all the dishes were put away, Britt said, "Sarah, it's time to go. Give Zoe and Mr. Dawson a hug and then we'll head home." After exchanging hugs and kisses as Zoe ran out onto the porch to give her friend Sarah another goodbye hug, I whispered in Brittany's ear, "You really are a great woman." She just smirked, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and then took Sarah's hand and walked about 100 yards to her house. I watched her body the whole way. Halfway home, she turned her head, saw me looking at her, and smiled at me. My interlude with Brittany was the beginning of the most sexually intense period of my life. I met all three women at Lilac Court and offered to find out if their husbands were cheating on them, saying that my friend was a private investigator and owed me a few favors. Of course, I would actually be the one paying, but I didn't want them to know that. The detective confirmed that all three were cheating. I told them that Grace was cheating, and we had a good cry together. After the tears, all three women on the dead end, Brittany, Chloe, and Melanie, who were overly attractive, unappreciated by their husbands, adventurous and appreciative of the fact that I had obtained proof of their husbands' cheating, fondled them and spontaneously gave them gifts, were eager for a loving relationship. All three were happy to share me, and when I was with one of them, the other usually watched both of our children. I probably averaged 1.5 times a week with each of them, and even took Brittany on a sleepover trip where we didn't have sex, but made love. I carefully chose every gift I bought them, and given my hidden wealth, didn't worry about the cost. However, they, at least Melanie, obviously knew how expensive these things were. This became clear one afternoon, about 4 months after I had first slept with Brittany. That morning I had dropped off a Loro Piana scarf from Neiman Marcus with Melanie. Chloe had taken Zoe, her kids, and Melanie's kids out for a walk, and I had just put Billy to bed and was about to work on some financial paperwork for a charity organization I had set up when my doorbell rang. As soon as I opened the door, Melanie squeezed past me into the house without saying a word. I closed the door and, smiling, asked her, "What's wrong?" "The scarf you gave me is worth over $1,100, dummy," she muttered. "So?" I smiled. "So I don't know if I can let you have sex with me for $100, and I don't feel like owing you," she replied, grinning again. "Well, why don't you give it a try and we'll see," I hummed. Not 2 minutes later, we found ourselves unclothed in my guest room having sex. When we recovered and lay side by side looking into each other's eyes, Melanie said, "I was trying to reward you, and instead I think I got more out of it than you did." "No way," I grinned. "That was really impressive." "I need to do something else," she continued. "I'd love to have sex with your breasts," I cackled. "You can do anything you want to me," she giggled back. I don't know how long my illicit relationship with 3 hot Lilac Street moms would have lasted had I still been married to my unfaithful wife when 3 things happened shortly after Billy turned 2. The first thing that happened was Chloe and her family moved 1,000+ miles away as her husband got a new, better job with less travel. Chloe told her husband about his cheating, and according to her, he seemed remorseful. Chloe saw the move as a chance to save her marriage, which had been on the rocks before she started cheating with me almost twice a week, and was much happier with her situation. Everyone else in the cul-de-sac threw her family a farewell party, paid for by me, with kids, a bounce house, pony rides, a barbecue with provisions, and all the adult beverages. The second thing that happened, about 2 months after Chloe's family left and the people who moved into their house got boring, was that Grace sat me down on Saturday and told me she wanted a divorce. I didn't care at all, because once I found out she was cheating, we lived pretty much apart, though we rarely fought. We had sex about once every 2 weeks, which was fine with me because I was getting as much sex as I could handle with the moms on Lilac Street, and I was already more in love with Brittany than I'd ever been with Grace. "Why do you want a divorce?" I asked her, even though I didn't care. Just curious. "My career is really taking off and you're not interested in money, and I'm tired of being the only one to realize my earning potential in this family. I'm tired of carrying you in my arms," she replied, putting her hands on her hips. I thought that was extremely funny and delusional since I pay for the house, buy all the groceries and everything for the kids. Grinning, which she didn't like, I replied, "Fine, we'll just enforce the prenup. However, there is one thing that is non-negotiable. I get sole custody of the children." No, I'll agree to joint custody, but not sole custody. I don't care what you agree to. If I don't get sole custody, I'll fight you through the courts until you go bankrupt. Besides, I'm sure your career will be ruined when I tell the upper management of your firm that you've had sex with two of your bosses in the last 2 years or so, provide photos and reports to their wives, and sue your company for failing to comply with the morals clause. What are you talking about? Stammering, she whispered. I strode into my office, pulled a folder out of my desk, and tossed it on the table. Here's your copy. On Monday or Tuesday, I'll file for irreconcilable differences, and I'll be granted sole custody, though I'll give you free visits. If you do not agree to my terms, I will go nuclear. Also, just so you know, I have almost 200,000. The interest on my money is far more than my expenses and charitable donations. And I will bury you and your lovers if need be. With Grace's full cooperation, the divorce went through in 4 months. She gave me the house and sole custody, and I let her keep all my money and half of what was in our bank account, none of the millions in my brokerage accounts. As soon as I filed for divorce, the third thing happened. Both Brittany and Melanie started lobbying for me to marry them. In fact, I got along so well with both of them that I would have happily married either of them. Plus, they were both the best women in my life by a wide margin. I never let Chloe know that she was only mediocre because I liked her. I liked Brittany a little more, but I would have been happy with either or both of them. This was the first time this was a point of contention between Brittany and Melanie, as their marriages were failing, and unlike Chloe, they weren't interested in trying to work things out. I pondered this for a long time, and one Monday, while I was having sex with Melanie in the morning and Brittany in the afternoon, an epiphany came over me. The very next day, I talked to both of them and told them we needed to give all the kids to a babysitter and have a morning business meeting on Friday. They were puzzled but agreed. We decided not to have sex before the meeting. By Friday, I had all the financial information and details of how everything would go down. When they arrived at my house at 9:30 Friday morning, I realized they were anxious. I offered them coffee and muffins and then handed each of them a packet with my proposal. Before you look at your packets, let me lay out a general proposal. Please don't say anything until I'm done. It will take about 45 minutes. Then you can ask any questions you want, say anything you want, including, go away, examine your packets, whatever you want, okay? They both agreed. Let me start by saying that I'm a lot richer than you think, and money to carry out my plan isn't even an issue, I announced. They raised their eyebrows. I really, really like everything about both of you. If I'm not in love with you, I'm close enough that it doesn't matter. I propose we pay for both of your divorces, buy a house big enough for all of our families, and move in together. I want at least one more child with one of you, maybe both of you. And I'll marry the one who has the child first, and I'll make a support agreement with the other and support you both for the rest of your lives, I continued, looking at their faces, which were becoming more and more shocked. By the end of my 45-minute presentation, they had dozens of questions. Some of them they didn't want the interviewer to hear, so we retired to another room to ask a question and get an answer. After all the questions were answered, they went through the proposals in their folders in detail. When they had gone through all the documents, I ended the session. Look, I don't have all the answers. Some things we'll have to play by ear. Some things we think will work out will have to be changed. There will be questions related to your children and current husbands, but if we want this to work out, it will. Think about it, and let's try to make a decision within a week or so, I concluded. Leave your packets here because we don't want your husbands to see them. By the following Friday, I had an answer ready. Melanie didn't think she could share me with Brittany on a long-term basis. She didn't really want another child, so Brittany would be the one I would marry because Brittany really wanted children with me, and Melanie was worried about her husband's reaction. Brittany, on the other hand, was determined that she was willing to do anything. When it was all over, I paid for Melanie's divorce. She got favorable terms thanks to the private investigator's information about his cheating, and also bought out her husband's share of their home for her so she could stay there with the children, getting physical custody as part of the joint custody agreement. She was full of optimism about how things would work out. Brittany and I got married as soon as her divorce was finalized. She also received physical custody of her daughter Sarah as part of the joint custody agreement. She and I moved 10 miles away from Lilac Street to a house large enough not only for the 3 children we married, but also for the 2 more that Brittany and I ended up having together. The house has an infinity pool, several acres of woods, a playground, basketball court, tennis court, and everything else a kid could want. It turns out that I am much more compatible with Brittany than I ever was with Grace, both in and out of the bedroom. Brittany and I both expect to end up married for 50 years. In fact, I love my current life even more than the time when I was Hopi's albino man. Epilogue. Libby graduated from community college. I paid her way through university and then medical school, and she is now a practicing OB/GYN, of which my parents and I are very proud. Grace didn't make partner at her ad agency. Management, and I promise it wasn't me who put the idea in their heads, got wind of her relationship, fired 2 of her bosses, and let her know she would never be promoted, so she quit. Zoe and Billy don't like her little apartment, which she visits a few times a year. Chloe has settled things with her husband and seems happy in her new place. Melanie befriended and married the owner of the landscaping company that did most of the lawns in Lilac Yard. She seems content, although not very happy. The end! Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.